Hi everyone, this is Alex Theodorou, and you're listening to the Startup Sit Down. Hey everyone, Alex here. I am joined by an awesome company that I'd like to introduce you today. I'm here with Dr. Celest Austin. She has a medical degree, a PhD, and in case that wasn't difficult enough, she also started a company named GoManda. Thank you for coming in, Celeste.
Thank you, Alex. I'm so excited to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, so why don't we start by just tell us a little bit about what is GoManda?
Yeah, so GoManda is an app that's all about teaching vocabulary comprehension to autistic kids, but using their learning styles. So, more than half of autistic children really struggle with this basic concept of vocabulary comprehension. And the reason why is because they're not being taught the right way. And that's what we've done is create an app that's science-based, evidence-based, to really teach vocabulary comprehension at really leverages the learning style of autism.
Incredible. That's amazing. And maybe I think for those who are unaware, you have a very unique story as well leading up to this, right? And I think that's the beauty of these kind of conversations is that on the surface we see it for what it offers, the solution, the problem that we're solving, but sometimes those problems hit close to home. So maybe tell us a little bit about where this started for you.
Yeah, so GoManda is actually named after my autistic sister, Amanda. GoManda is a cheer we had for her while growing up. And for me, it just all started when I was a kid. And just, I lived in a time when autism was an enigma. And so I took it upon myself to understand my sister. And I realized that she had a very different way of processing information, seeing the world. And I really wanted other people to understand that. I didn't really know how to do any of that, and I didn't know what to do with the information I had. So I went ahead and got my medical degree, my PhD to learn everything I could about autism, only to realize that as a child I had it all figured out. That autism is just a different way of processing information and seeing the world, and I really was surprised of how little there was of resources to leverage that, and so that's kind of how GoManda came about.
Amazing. And your sister today, have you been able to work with her through the use of this app? Was it developed in conjunction with her? Was she kind of user number one, so to speak, or like
Yeah, yeah, essentially. Of course, she's older now, and vocabulary comprehension, thankfully, has been something that we've worked on. She and I, and with other professionals. In fact, the concept of GoManda kind of came about from my own experience of teaching with her vocabulary. For example, most autistic individuals are so detail oriented that if you teach them a cup, for example, that's blue, and they ask for a cup of water and you gave them a red cup, well, that red cup isn't a cup. Everything about that original blue cup made it a cup. And for some who are extremely detail oriented, maybe even the imperfections of that cup makes it a cup. And my sister struggled in that way. And I remember grabbing the cups from the cupboard and just really showing her, hey, look, this is a cup, and this is a cup, and this is a cup. That's essentially what we've created. And so she's been helpful in kind of making sure that it's it's playable and things like that. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And I think you're right. And it's something that you and I may take for granted as more, I guess you could say, neurotypical individuals. That what is a cup, right? Something that just sounds so commonplace. You don't realize that there's so many variations. And to people with these types of learning differences and perspectives, it's almost as if you need to have a more templated view of what a cup could be and what are the edge cases, right?
Right. And it's an incredible gift, I say to people, to see the world in that much detail. But it's just a struggle when it comes to in the beginning, when you're just trying to categorize everything. But once you have that guide, which, GoManda is, everything starts to make sense, and they can finally reach their potential.
Yeah, and I know we spoke about a little bit about this yesterday, but I know in my experiences, I know we there's always this kind of I guess you could say, a bit of a debate. I know it's very topical. So you literally just spoke on this topic just yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, on the person-focused language versus kind of the more agentive approach, right? Like they're embodying the kind of the, the title of like autistic person versus person with autism. So maybe tell a little bit about why you choose this form of descriptors versus kind of the more, I guess you could say, um, well documented, or maybe that's the wrong choice of words. Maybe in my maybe non-expert opinion, like you saying, I always tend to lean more towards person with something, person with blindness, person with dementia, person with autism. So tell us a little bit about that,
Right,
because I think
right.
that's fascinating.
So I'm coming from a medical background as well, and of course we use person first language in that setting. But it wasn't until I learned more about what actually autistic adults wanted, and that really changed my perspective of my language. I never want to be one of those people that tells others how they should be identified. I feel like that is something that that person should tell me how they want to be identified. So I learned from the community, and I really believed, and I really loved the reasoning behind it too. So person first language is obviously when you say something like person with autism, versus identity first language, which is autistic person. So the growing autism adult community prefers identity first because they feel that their autism is so woven into who they are and their identity that they don't want it to be separated in any way. I know there's a long history of the identity first language being used in a negative way, but I think they're trying to reinvent that. And I really love the concept of saying, this is who I am. I want to be accepted for who I am. I don't want it to be separated, even in the language, from the language concept of person with autism. It's not something that can just be taken away from me. It's not an accessory. It is just who I am. And I really love that because our product is all about accepting autism as it is and teaching with the learning style. So um, I have been using that language ever since. I do talk with professionals often who try to correct me, and I say, that's all purposeful. My language that I'm using is very purposeful. It's come to the point where I actually start many of my talks with a slide that says, we are an identity first language company, just because I feel like I get a lot of comments about it. So, but I'm just trying to honor the autistic adult community, and that's what they want.
That's wild. So, it's interesting because I think here what I'm hearing, and I know we've had some conversations prior to all of this, but just for others to kind of understand a little bit of the glimpse of what we've already discussed. But I think it's fascinating because here what I'm seeing is this seems somewhat at odds with kind of where the industry is. These professionals and presumably experts in the field are here, saying, well, person with autism is this kind of accepted, more politically correct version. And you're saying, no, 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 it's identity first. And now to the point where you almost need to preface conversations by stating this. Do you feel that this, like maybe pushes the buttons of people in that sector? Do they push back? Do you feel resistance in trying to work with them, sell to them, collaborate with them? Do you feel there's any sort of friction that comes with that language?
Yeah, that's a really great question. One of the first things I say when someone says something like that is I say exactly what I just mentioned. And I also say 88% of autistic adults would prefer identity first language. And I want to honor the individuals that I'm trying to serve. I actually have had autistic individuals on my team. So this is obviously a label that, or an identification that, they feel strongly about as well. Um, for professionals, I don't have the exact statistics, but I will say every time I'm in a conference, because all of my materials are identity first, I will get a few people come up to me and they'll say, "Hey, I just want to let you know that you have the wrong language," and
Wow.
I have to say, "Well, let me explain to you that it's purposeful." I explain to them, and I will say a vast majority will be like, "Oh, thank you. I didn't really actually know that." And so that's nice. There is a small minority that will push back and say, "Well, this is the way it should be. This is the way I believe it to be." And I just simply say, "Well, I just never want to be in that position where I'm telling others how
Yeah.
they should be identified. That seems
Right.
like not my role in life."
Yeah, and I think another thing too is that there's this almost like prescriptive approach, right? And when you're dealing with medical professionals, I think that prescriptive approach and perspective is very much kind of underscores a lot of what professionals do, right? So I think, when you're kind of breaking the mold and you're saying,
Right.
"Hey, listen, like listen, I know this is not what you like to hear, but this is the way I use it and this is backed by the people who are all trying to help." It kind of turns the tables on like what they should be like. It almost like you get visible resistance, right? You get people that
Right.
are stopping you after talks and saying like, "Oh, just so you know, your words aren't right." You know what I mean? So
Right. Right.
that tells you a little bit about kind of the overarching rigidity of perspective, right? And I think that, so aside from you and your approach to um, you know like kind of identity first language, are there others in the industry that are championing this type of approach? Is there a movement that's trending towards this, or are you kind of fighting an uphill battle in that regard?
I mean, I'm not, of course, I am not spearheading this movement. It's obviously the brave autistic individuals who are spearheading this. In terms of industry, yeah, a lot of the big box educational companies are still using the traditional language. I've actually had advisors from those sectors tell me to play the game,
Hmm.
change my
Wow.
language. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that because it's really against our own mission as a
Right.
company. So that's why I came up with the idea of having that slide. And actually, that's been going very well when I
Amazing.
explain to people why I'm doing, like, I'm not coming from an area where, I don't know what I'm talking about.
Right.
I'm actually been doing my research with the community and I know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Um, but there are a couple of companies coming out there who are very pro neurodiversity. They're young, and I'm really happy to know them.
Mm.
And they're really trying to also change the way that we see learning differences.
Right.
So, no, but the big boxes out there, the big box
Yeah.
companies still are
That's wild.
very traditional. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, that's wild, and it's surreal to think that with all the progressiveness and how things are changing with gender identity, other types of identity, you'd think that this
right,
would be an inevitability. And what I'm hearing is that it's almost sounds like, well, why rock the boat,
right.
right?
Things are happening. Changes are happening. In fact, the White House in April for autism. Now that it's called Autism Awareness Month, but I like many other autistic advocates are all about saying Autism Acceptance Month. But
Okay.
they actually wrote in the White House, I guess whatever they send out during every holiday or
Mhm.
every event, they use the identity first language. So
Wow.
changes are happening. It's slow, but it's happening. A lot of Actually, there's a lot of research now. Researchers who are autistic who are now speaking out and coming up with papers and being like, "Hey, we need to start changing our language." So
Yeah,
I think it's happening, and I'm happy to hear that.
that's
There's just going to be some industries that are going to be slower, which
yeah,
is how it
and
goes.
that's always going to happen, right? But again, this is the, I guess you could say, the fortunate and maybe to some unfortunate kind of realities of starting a company, right? Is that you need to be that champion and kind of carve that path out and take the path of most resistance, right? Not the path of least resistance, which is what we're, which is going with what has been set up into this point, right? So it's great that you made this part of your presentations. You set the tone in how you'll be using the vernacular, the nomenclature, all of that great kind of the verbiage, to
Yeah,
to to
yeah.
capture what it means to be that person and how you can best represent their experiences. So you mentioned a little bit about the vision of GoManda. What is the vision of the company to you?
Yeah. We have a vision of really helping every child that learns differently. We don't believe that a child should fit into the box that is the current traditional education system. We believe that every child is very different, and they should be allowed to learn the way that they are built to learn. And so we want to build a suite of products that tailor to the learning style of every child. Um, and one of the other things that goes along with is actually helping even neurotypic kids, because it turns out that there is actually a lot of differences there too, that people don't want to talk about. And in particular, for younger neurotypic kids who also struggle with vocabulary comprehension, they may not necessarily have a diagnosis, but they still struggle. And this method that I described, um, about learning vocabulary comprehension is actually universal in all of us. The only difference between a neurotypic child and an autistic child is the amount of variations they need, that can differ. So,
Can you describe that?
yeah, so for a neurotypic child, they may um, require one or two variations of a like cup, whereas an autistic child may need 15. There's nothing wrong about that. It's just everyone gets hung up on different things, and that's okay. But sometimes for a neurotypic child, maybe they don't get exposed to enough different types of nouns, and that's where the hang up is. And we can provide that. So our whole goal is to get everybody on the same page when it comes to vocabulary comprehension.
Right. Yeah, and I think, I guess with that, I know in a past life, actually, for those who probably don't know this about me, but I was actually on the track to become a speech language pathologist before I did all of this
Very
work.
cool.
And so, what we did back in the day was a thing called a PECS board for
Mm,
children with autism or autistic children, and with that, it was a very rudimentary set of skills, but it basically allowed people to compartmentalize actions, sequences, behaviors, emotions, relationships into these modular ways, right? And I think what I'm seeing here, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that it almost feels like the representation of an autistic child is that, with a cup, it's not that they need to see more, it's maybe they see them as discrete aspects of these semantic things, right? A cup is something that is 2 inches tall that holds liquid. Well, what about something that's 4 inches tall that holds liquid?
right.
That's still a cup. But yes, it is because of its shape. But this shape is not right. So it's almost like
Exactly.
they've got to build out the gamut of all of these cup-like objects to better define what a cup is. Whereas you and I, and for neurotypic, as you mentioned, individuals, we can look at one conception, like one version of a thing, and say, now we know all the approximations of a cup.
Right. And that's actually exactly right. The way I best explain it is, the autistic mind is when they're learning new, like for example, a new concept like cup, it's an additive process. So they start with the first cup that they learned, and then okay, like if somebody else says, "Hey, actually, this other cup is also a cup," they add it to that new catalog. And eventually, there'll be a mental prototype formed when enough variations exist. For a neurotypic child, it's more of a pruning process. So, like you said, when they first learn the cup, perhaps they'll make a lot of mistakes and think maybe a vase is a cup, maybe a bowl is a cup, because they're casting a large net
Right.
of what that word is or that concept is. And so what they end up doing is just kind of cutting away things. Okay, the vase is not a cup.
Right.
The bowl isn't a cup. And then that leaves behind a big, whatever is left over. But so it's a different process. There's nothing right or wrong about it. It's just a different way of learning.
Yeah. Amazing. Wow. Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's almost like a bottom up versus a top down kind of
Yes.
approach type of thinking,
Right.
right? And so, wow, that's fascinating. And uh, sorry, I just had to like take that in for a minute. It was very profound. It's very cool. Um, no, it's definitely surreal, and my family works quite extensively with people with different just different disabilities and needs and developmental delays and otherwise. So it's great to see the work you're doing with this. And while it starts with flashcards, or maybe just that kind of aspect of learning and vocabulary, it ends with a suite of products. So maybe can you tell us a little bit about maybe a sneak peek of what are some other components to GoManda that you would inevitably want to support over and beyond the current product offering?
Yeah. So, like I said, well, we call ourselves a Netflix for vocabulary. So we have this app that showcases all these different variations of all the common nouns that a child can encounter. So, with the same example of cup, we have tons of variations of what a cup could be. In the future, we are hoping to add, or we will be adding video to showcase verbs, function,
Mm,
and then move towards more abstract ideas. And of course, these are kind of in the near future, and in the obviously, what our vision is to kind of expand this right to other learning styles. So, doing the groundwork of that is kind of what we're doing now. Um, but yeah, we want to be the definitely the go-to for vocabulary comprehension and hopefully the go-to for every child.
incredible, incredible. And if I'm not mistaken, you're also doing some work right now with some organizations. Is there maybe is there something you'd like to comment on that with kind of the nature of the kind of the, you don't have to get into the details, but just in terms of the uh, maybe the impact, or what are the outcomes you're aiming for, or what does success look like to you in these pilot programs?
Right. So we've done some work with school districts. We're based in Austin. And so we've done some work with school districts around us. One of our most meaningful case study that we've done is working with a child who really had a lot of negative emotions when it came to learning, had really difficulty sitting down and being engaged in learning vocabulary comprehension, in particular with flashcards. Well, he got 5 weeks with us with an app that teaches, and we really saw a transform student. He was able to sit down, saw a 90% increase in his engagement and his attention, and needing very little redirection with his educator. And alongside that, his vocabulary score increased by 400%. So, because he was
Wow,
able to engage and to learn the way that I think he needed, he was able to really demonstrate an improvement. Um, and we've really worked closely with some community schools in Austin, and we've been released for a little bit over a year. We do have a home version that you can download, and but we've been really focused on school districts because we really feel like that's where we can make the biggest impact. And now this year, we've actually this is the first time we've actually had contracts, and so really looking forward to deploying these into the schools and seeing what kind of impact we can make.
incredible, absolutely incredible. So I think for those listening, and you're at this point of the conversation, I think what I'd love to hear, and maybe I'm sure many others, how can people learn more? How can they get in touch with you? Let the people know where they can find you.
Yeah, check us out at www.gomanda.com. If you want to email me, my email is austin@gomanda.com. You can download us right now from the Apple's App Store. We're right now only for iOS, meaning for iPad and iPhone. And we're working towards providing this to Android devices as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Celeste, for coming in, and
Thank you.
it's a pleasure. And please do check out GoManda. It's a fantastic resource, great story, great founder. So thank you, Celeste, for coming in, and
Thank you.
yeah, look forward to talking with you soon. Take care.
Thank you.